Hi everyone, welcome to our On Demand. Our introduction question reads, how many musical ensembles can you name? Let you think about that for a moment. Working as a musical ensemble. Identify different musical ensembles and their rules within them. Analyze a musical ensemble from a list and describe and assess it. Types of musical ensembles. Orchestra, brass bands, wind, chamber ensembles, rock and pop groups, jazz groups, folk bands, gamelan, steel pan bands, vocal groups, and early music groups. The orchestra. The orchestra has been around since the 1600s. The Baroque orchestra lasted from 1600 to 1750, classical 1750 to 1830, romantic 1830 to 1910. Today an orchestra would have over 90 players. The principal roles within an orchestra would be the conductor and the leader, but in reality every member of the orchestra has a pivotal role to play. Over on the right you see Monteverdi, famous composer, Mozart, and Richard Wagner. And we studied Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Richard Wagner in here. This is a seating chart for the orchestra. Usually the harp is up on the front left of the stage, the conductor's in the center, the violins and violas and cellos are in blue along with the double basses, and then we have our woodwinds in green, flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. Then we have our brass, the horns, trumpet, tuba, and trombone, and then our percussion in the back in red. Brass bands. Brass bands have been around since the 1830s and have always been linked with the workforce. Brass bands have cornets, a flugelhorn, euphoniums, trombones, bass trombone, tubas, tenor horns, baritones, and percussion. Brass band contests take place throughout the country several times a year. The most famous are the Saddleworth Brass Band Contest and the British National Brass Band Contest held at the Royal Albert Hall. Wind band, also known as wind ensembles, is an orchestra without the strings. They have flutes and piccolos, oboes, clarinets, bass clarinet, alto, tenor, baritone, saxophone, bassoon, trumpet, cornets, horns, baritones, trombones, tubas, and percussion. Associated with military bands which have been around in some form from the 11th century Crusades, famous composers of the wind band music are the Australian Percy Grainger and the English Ralph Vaughan Williams. Wind bands also include a lot of film and television music in their repertoire. Chamber ensembles. The term originally meant intimate music for a small group of players, usually performed within the home, and has been around since the Middle Ages. Originally just for string instruments, but during the 18th century, wind instruments were also included. The string quartet was made popular by Haydn in the 1750s. Music for a string quartet usually shares the tune between all players, thus making an equal role for all. Chamber orchestra became popular during the two world wars for a simple reason: they were cheaper to hire or run. And we studied Franz Joseph Haydn in here this year. And then we have rock groups. Rock music evolved from the deep blues music brought to the North after the Deep South by African Americans after World War II. Leo Fender was the first to mass produce the electric guitar in 1948. African American music evolved from Motown in the 1960s to disco and rap in the 1990s. Elvis Presley, who we also studied in here, became one of the most popular rock artists of the 20th century, also becoming one of the first artists to be a teenage heartthrob. Pop groups. Pop music began to evolve in the 1960s with groups such as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The Eurovision Song Contest originally was a place for new pop acts to enter the profession, bringing Swedish group ABBA to the forefront in 1974. Pop and rock are similar in their instrumentation. A group would usually consist of both electric and bass guitars, drums, keyboard, and vocalist, or vocalists, plural. The main difference between pop and rock is the terms themselves. Popular music is ever-changing, while rock is a separate genre evolving throughout the 20th century. Pop can be applied to any genre of the day. Therefore, the pop musicians of the Baroque era would be composers such as Bach. Jazz groups. An American genre originating in cities such as New Orleans and Chicago, and we studied jazz in here in depth. It evolved from Dixieland jazz and ragtime with composers such as Scott Joplin, famous for his piano piece The Entertainer. Trumpet player Louis Armstrong, who we also studied in here, was one of the first to create jazz as we recognize it and started the tradition of improvised solos. Jazz could include many combinations of instruments, including trumpets, saxophones, clarinets, double bass, drums, and piano. More modern jazz included artists such as Miles Davis, Benny Goodman, and Gordon Goodwin. Folk groups. Folk music is any music specific to a certain place. This does not just mean music specific to each country, but also music specific to each county and village, etc. Work songs are one form of folk music. For example, songs from the work plantations during the slave trade era in America. Ballads, songs that told a story, either fictional legends or news of the day. Sometimes these were unaccompanied, sometimes with an instrumental accompaniment. Music for dancing is still popular. Today, musicians such as Bob Dylan are considered to be folk artists. Gamelan. Gamelan music originated in South Asia. It always consists of a series of different gongs, sometimes with drums and flutes, stringed instruments, and occasionally vocalists. In 1889, Paris hosted an exhibition of music from all over the world. Composers were suddenly exposed to new styles of music. Composers such as Debussy began to bring gamelan into their own music. Steel pan bands. Originally from Trinidad, they became popular in the 1930s and 1940s. Steel pans or drums were made from the top half of oil drums. The larger the half used, the deeper the sound of the drum. They were often used in carnival or samba bands. These days, steel pan bands often use Western instruments such as guitars or drum kits alongside the steel drums. Vocal groups. One of the earliest forms of vocal groups were the singers of madrigals in the 15th century. Women were forbidden to sing in church, so the high parts were sung by young boys. Opera came to the forefront in the 1500s, leading both men and women to extend their vocal range as composers experimented with new musical techniques. Choirs have existed since medieval times, mainly for church services. The earliest mass setting is attributed to Guillaume de Méchain, a composer of the 1300s. Oratorios by composers such as Handel in the 18th century, sung by both men and women, led to the formation of choral societies. Today, singing has been made popular through musical theater, composers such as Lloyd Webber and Sondheim. Early music groups. The Gregorian chant, named after Pope Gregory I, is one of the earliest known forms of music. These chants were often sung in churches and monasteries. to call people to worship or to signal certain points in the Mass. Secular music was also used, often on long journeys as a means of passing the time or as work songs. Very few people sung the music of other people. Much of what they performed were their own compositions. The time of the first peripatetic musicians. The traveling musicians of the noble were troubadours, while the professional entertainers of low birth were minstrels. Our exit ticket. Which ensemble do you like the most and why? Think about that, because for your independent practice, which is due May 20th, watch the movie clip titled Musicians and then choose one of the following music ensembles. Research your ensemble and answer the following questions about it. Use a Word document. Turn it into Brain Honey, 10 points. Choose from orchestra, brass bands, wind bands, chamber ensembles, rock or pop groups, jazz groups, folk bands, gamelan steel bands, vocal groups, or early music groups. Name the ensemble you choose, 2 points. State why you chose it, 2 points. Name all the instruments in the ensemble, 2 points. Describe how each instrument produces sound, 2 points. Name the way the ensemble is used, for example, worship, entertainment, to honor our armed forces, 2 points. The total is 10 points. That's due May 20th, and also watch the movie clip titled Musicians. Everything is located in Brain Honey. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at sandy.boyer@pacyber.org. Have a nice day, everybody, and we'll see you on Friday or Thursday, depending on when I have you for class.